G'day everyone and welcome to Brushes with Beck. This video is a comparison video of the Derwent Drawing pencils versus the Faber-Castell Polychromos coloured pencils, and I'm going to be comparing them by doing a detailed drawing of an eye with each set of pencils. So before we get into the drawings, this is a colour chart that I made up of both the Derwent Drawing and Faber-Castell Polychromos. Now this is not all 24 colours of the Derwent Drawing. I made this colour chart after I did the first drawing of the eye with the Derwent Drawing pencils, and then I only matched up the colours that I had used of the Derwent Drawing, which was 19 of them, not the full 24. I only matched those 19 colours up with Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils. Now, despite the fact that Faber-Castell Polychromos come in a range of 120 colours, there's still some discrepancies in my colour matching. The most obvious are probably this Derwent Drawing Smoke Blue that I had to match with Polychromos Helio Turquoise, and then this Derwent Drawing Mars Violet, and the closest match I could find to that was the Polychromos Light Red Violet, and you can see it is quite different. It is a yellowish purple, but it's still a very different colour. And you know, most of the browns I could find a very similar match, obviously the black. The interesting thing was the Derwent Drawing Cool Grey I found to be closer to the Polychromos Warm Grey 2, whereas the Derwent Drawing Solway Blue was closer to a Polychromos Cold Grey 2. So that was quite interesting. So this is how I matched the colours together. These are the matches that I chose. They were as close as possible as I could really get, but obviously I had to make a few allowances. Now the reason I matched up 19 colours from the Polychromos to go with the colours that I used of the Derwent Drawing pencils was so that this drawing comparison would be a bit more fair. I didn't want to go in with just 24 colours from Derwent Drawing and then go in with the full range of 120 colours from the Faber-Castell and have more options for colour depth and, you know, values and all that sort of thing. So the main goal was to have a similar colour range and to just compare how each pencil is used and the differences in sort of a final product in terms of detail and the darkness and the lights and all that sort of thing and how the pencils go down. So that's the colour matching that I did, and we'll move on to the first drawing with the Derwent Drawing pencils. So this first image on the left hand side here I am doing with the Derwent Drawing pencils. Both of these drawings are on the same piece of paper. This is Pastelmat paper in the light green colour, and the drawings are about 9 by 9 centimetres each, which is just under 4 inches. Now, as you can see, I'm going in with the Derwent Drawing pencils quite heavily. I'm just using a little bit of a cotton bud there to sort of illustrate how the Derwent Drawing pencils don't blend out for me very well with the cotton bud, because that's the main reason I actually just started doing this drawing in the first place, is that I wanted to practice more with the Derwent Drawing pencils on Pastelmat, because I found I had trouble sort of getting them to cover the paper well without sort of clumping together, and I couldn't really use the cotton bud with them to spread them around like I could with the Polychromos pencils. So that's why I wanted to try and do this image and really get a better understanding of how to use the Derwent Drawing pencils on this Pastelmat paper. So I've gone in quite heavily with the Derwent Drawing pencils in order to cover the tooth of that paper, and this is a really good experiment because it allows me to see how much I can press pigment into that paper and still layer over the top. And as you can see, I've gone in, put a really solid layer of, I think, the warm grey and the cool grey down in that area, and then I'm still putting in details and over the top of that with some chocolate and some Chinese white there. So I found that layering with the Derwent Drawing pencils on this Pastelmat paper, no problem at all. I could keep going over the top, and that really wasn't an issue. I could still lay pigment down, and that's the beauty of this paper, is that you're able to put so many layers down and there's still enough tooth to pick up the pigment from another layer if you want to put some fine details over the top. Now, one of the main things to remember about Derwent Drawing pencils versus Polychromos pencils is that Derwent Drawing pencils are a wax-based pencil. They're very soft cored, so you can get a sharp point, but it doesn't keep for very long. versus the Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils are an oil-based pencil. You can sharpen to a very fine point, and that point stays for a lot longer, and it's easier to get fine detail. So I did struggle a little bit with getting those little feather strokes on this image, and I found that when I was trying to get those really fine strokes, because I was trying to use lighter pressure so I didn't wear down the point too much, I found that my fine strokes were a little bit gritty and I wasn't quite getting as much pigment into all the tooth of the paper as I wanted. So they're a little bit grainy, those little fine feather strokes. And that's just the nature of this wax-based pencil, and not really something that you can it's not something that you can really fairly compare these pencils on, because they are composed of different materials. But it is worth noting, because depending on what kind of piece you are doing, that may be important for you, and it's a good reason why these pencils are used well together, because the Derwent Drawing can cover large areas easily, and the Polychromos can do some nice fine details. Now on the eye here, this was a challenge for me, because I had to get this blend of bright yellow down to a sort of a green colour, and into a little bit of hint of blue around the edge. And I really struggled getting a nice bright green, because all of the greens in the range of the Derwent Drawing pencils are actually very muted, sort of very pale, toned down kind of greens, nothing very bright. So I was trying to find a blend of using the yellow and the blue and the greens that made a nice bright green there. And I didn't quite get it as bright as I would have liked, but it came out pretty good in the end after multiple layers. You can just see me working around the eye and laying in that Derwent Drawing Ivory Black. That is a very rich black colour and covers the paper very, very easily. I found that worked really, really nicely. Now, as you see me working around the rim of the eye here, you can see me working back and forth between colours. I put in some lighter colours, some blues, and the Mars Violet. Went around the rim with black and then blended out with, I think it was the warm grey or the cool grey. And I actually found that using the pencils in that manner, using the lighter colours to blend the other colours together, actually worked quite well. But I did have to darken it up. I didn't go in dark enough at first, and I had to go back in with black and re-blend over the top and just work that a little bit to get it how I wanted. But I did find that I was able to push the colours around and blend out some lower layers by applying another layer more firmly over the top, without having to go in too heavy with my initial layers. So that was quite nice. Now I'm just doing another solid layer of black there. I think it's ink blue, or in the Derwent Drawing range. Easy to get a very solid layer of black in this range. And you can see why people use these pencils to really fill up an area of an underlayer of colour, or as, you know, for subtle colours because of the muted colour range of this pencil set, or for like softer background areas and not the really detailed areas of a piece, which, you know, I am trying to do with this pencil set in this piece. You can see me trying to do really, really fine details in the eye there. The eye is very complex in this reference photo, and it's full of all these different markings and sort of striations and streaking, and it's absolutely beautiful. But getting those really fine little streaking lines with my Derwent Drawing pencils was extremely challenging, and you'll see how that compares once I do the other eye with the Polychromos. It's actually quite striking, the difference in that. And going over it with a darker colour, which I needed to do, only made it, you know, less defined and a little bit more fuzzy. It was just simply really tough to get that very fine detail. I mean, I managed to achieve it, but when you compare it to the other piece, you realise just how sort of a little bit fuzzy it really is, as opposed to being very sharp and clear. Now, I chose this reference photo because I thought it had a good mix of the color tones that are available in the Derwent Drawing pencil range, because obviously, as I said, there's only 24 colors available. So I needed to pick something that was going to be achievable. And secondly, it had a mixture of large solid areas, such as in the eye, combined with detail, lots and lots of detail, and a great range of values, some really deep darks and some really bright whites. So I thought this would be a really good example of using both of these pencils and a good way to compare them with something that explored a range of different techniques and a range of different values in one piece, rather than just focusing on such as the pupil of an eye. It's good to do the feathers around it as well. So I did struggle with some of the feathered areas. I realized on this piece, on that bottom left-hand side there, that I went a bit light behind the black feathers and I didn't make it quite dark enough before I went over the top there. But once I'd put the black in over the top, it was too late to go back in and darken that up underneath. So I just left it. But it still looks good. It just isn't quite as dark as it should be compared to my reference photo. Now, I found that some of my Derwent Drawing pencils blended out other colours better than others, and I think that's pretty normal. That lighter brown there really smoothed out some of my other colours that I'd gone in with beforehand. And then I was able to work over the top of that. As you can see, once I've got that solid layer of colour down, I'm still able to go in over the top and add plenty of fine detail quite easily with these pencils. Like I said, they provide a really rich solid colour. It's just that fine point is really tough to maintain. And you're either constantly having to sharpen it or constantly rotating your pencil and trying to use that fine edge on the pencil rather than the point, which is just going to go blunt too quickly. Now this is really where the Derwent Drawing pencils shine. You can see I've already done underneath the eyelid there in one rim where it's quite dark, and then I'm just using the white straight over the top. And the Derwent Drawing Chinese white is very, very opaque, and it's very bright white here, as you can see. And it really stands out against these darker values and then against that little lower eyelid section there. I had to go back in with the dark colours and add in some little strokes for feathers for that, because I couldn't get the little white strokes with the white pencil. It was too tricky. I couldn't get that little detail in there. But as you can see, I finished it up and it looks really good. Unfortunately, once I've moved on to the Polychromos side, the Derwent Drawing side isn't quite in focus and there's a bit of glare from the camera there, so you can't really get a good comparison for that until the end of this video, so hold tight for that. If you are enjoying this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, comment down below and subscribe to my channel so you can see weekly art videos. So on the Polychromos side, like I said, I've selected 19 matching colours to match the colour range from the Derwent Drawing, and I'm just going straight in and trying to have a similar approach to how I went with the Derwent Drawing pencils. Now, if you've watched any of my previous videos lately where I've used Pastelmat with Polychromos pencils, you will know that I love blending them out with a cotton bud. I have specifically not done that here, so that we get a more fair comparison between using the Polychromos against the Derwent Drawing. I wanted to try the same techniques with each type of pencil so that you can compare the process, how it works, how it doesn't work, and if the pencils still lay over the top of each other quite easily. And as you can see so far, very similar process, my warm greys and cool greys going down first, and putting those darks and lights over the top quite easily. Now, it is important to note that the Polychromos white is much more transparent than the Derwent Drawing white, but on this Pastelmat paper, it still shows up quite vibrant on that top area there, and you still get some nice bright whites. Moving over to the eye, and I have used the same process on the eye as what I did for the Derwent Drawing pencil. So I've gone in with an ivory colour first, used the yellow over the top, and built up the greens and blues. Now my yellow colour was quite a bit stronger in the Polychromos range, and my blue was a very different blue. And I had similar greens, but sort of stronger greens than what I have in the Derwent Drawing range. I did find I had trouble blending out the colours, like getting them smooth, which is why I used sort of ivory over the top to try and smooth them out a bit, because I wasn't getting that smooth blend like I did more easily with the Derwent Drawing pencils by just blending out with the pencils over the top of one another, if that makes sense. And as you can see already, I've got a richer yellow and quite a brighter green in that position, and that has worked. So that's just a matter of slightly different colour range. I've had to work a bit harder here to cover the solid black of the pupil, but I have got a nice solid black pupil there in the end. And like I said, same process as with the Derwent Drawing pencil. Like I said, it's a little bit hard to compare at the moment because my focus is on the drawing on the right and my Derwent Drawing pencil drawing is currently a little bit out of focus and a bit glary from my lights, but it will get more obvious towards the end what the differences between these two pieces are. So I'm trying to keep the process as similar as possible, moving through the piece in the same order. Now, like I said earlier, the Polychromos pencils are oil-based, which means they sharpen to a finer point and keep that point much more easily, which means fine detail is easier and you keep a sharper pencil for longer. As I said though, with the white being a little bit more transparent, some of the colours are simply more transparent than they are with the Derwent Drawing pencils. Wax-based pencils tend to have really opaque pigments. But with the Pastelmat paper and the tooth on that paper, you can still get those vibrant colours over the top of one another with almost, what I find with even this more transparent Polychromos pencils. Same process around the rim of the eye there, working in some darks and blending out with the greys over the top. Adding some of those colours in around there. Moving on to the eye detail, and it doesn't take long before you can see how different this process is. Even with the Derwent Drawing one slightly out of focus, you can see I've got a much finer point on my Faber-Castell Polychromos pencil, and those little wiggly lines going into the eye are much more fine, much more sort of detailed and crisp. And I did initially forget to go in over those with a darker pencil, but I will come back to that. Working through those feathers around the bottom of the eye. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't go as dark as I would have liked in the bottom left corner on my Derwent Drawing side, so I went a little bit darker with the Polychromos side in an attempt to sort of improve on my first image. I didn't want to go too strong with my colours, so I kind of left the paper a bit grainy and then I blended it out with the warm grey. It wasn't quite as smooth as I would have liked, but with all the feather texture over the top, it didn't really matter in the end. But that's the sort of thing where normally I'd prefer to blend it out with a cotton bud and I get a fairly nice smooth blend with that without having to worry about the grain of the paper so much. And now you can see once I've got that base layer in, I'm really starting to build up texture, mapping in those darks underneath those little eye rim feathers. They're quite unique, those little ones. I guess they help protect the eye. Oh, this eye, by the way, I think I forgot to mention, is actually the eye from a bush stone-curlew. It is an Australian native bird. They are nocturnal. They basically live and nest on the ground. They have long legs. They're quite unique looking, and I photographed this one at my local zoo. So just going in and refining those last details, those black feathers over the top, getting some darks in there, putting in some nice detailed little feathers, and really trying to boost those values underneath that eye as well. Now, going in with the white Polychromos pencil here, you can see the difference between the Polychromos white and the Derwent Drawing white, because although it still lays over quite nicely on this Pastelmat, it's not as vivid as the Derwent Drawing Chinese white is, which is still a really bright white, whereas the Polychromos white is a little bit more toned down. It still goes over the top of the darker areas on the Pastelmat paper here, but it's simply not quite as bright as the Derwent Drawing pencil. And just going in over those little eye veins or lines, and even going over the top of them with a darker colour, they're still very crisp and very fine, whereas compared to on the Derwent Drawing side, they're not fine and crisp like that at all. So there you can see there is a comparison between the two pieces. I feel like the main difference to be seen is really in the crispness of the detail of those really fine feathers around the eye. In the Polychromos side, those little details are very fine and very sharp, and on the Derwent Drawing side, they are softer. All the feathers have a little bit of a softer look. The whites are a little bit brighter on the Derwent Drawing side, but the colours are a little bit richer on the Polychromos side, and that's simply a matter of the available colour range, because the yellow was brighter and my greens were a little bit brighter on my Polychromos side. So overall, they are both fantastic pencils. I find that just blending with pencils by layering, the Derwent Drawing a little bit easier to do than the Polychromos were, but normally I use Polychromos, like I said, with a cotton bud to smooth out and blend out, and it's a much quicker process, and I don't have trouble with that. But just blending with layering, I feel like the wax-based pencils did that very easily while covering the paper surface itself. So that's something to keep in mind. Overall, they are both great pencils, and what you decide to use may depend on what you want to use it for. If you're doing a super detailed piece, quite small, I don't recommend the Derwent Drawing pencils. They're great pencils, but they're not great for that super fine detail, especially in small areas. If you're doing a much larger piece with less fine details, perfectly suited. But if you really want to get that crisp, fine, sharp detail, that's what your Polychromos is for. And of course, they can be used together. So both of these pencils are fantastic pencils. They both work very, very well. They do as described. The main differences are in sort of just little itty-bitty nitty-gritty details. And they just simply both have something that they are better at, but that doesn't mean that either of them are bad. Because I certainly do love both of these pencil sets and use them all the time, together and separately. So overall, I would not say that one pencil set is better than the other. Like I said, they both have their pros and they both have their cons, although the cons are very few and far between. So like with anything, it's just learning how to use it, learning what situations it's best to use it in and how to use it. And as you can see, I've gotten a good result with both sets of pencils. One's a little bit softer than the other, but that's not really a problem. For something like this, you're not looking at it super close generally. You're looking at it from at least a few feet away, in which case it looks crisper anyway, because you've zoomed out and sharpened those details a little bit. So overall, with this piece, probably doesn't matter which set I used. Both have resulted in a great drawing, but I do hope this video has given you some insights into what each of these pencils may be better at. This isn't a full-fledged, thorough comparison side-by-side comparing each aspect of both of these pencil sets. That's not what this video was about. It was simply about practicing with my Derwent Drawing pencils on Pastelmat paper and then comparing how Faber-Castell Polychromos pencils manage the same task. So if you enjoyed this video, once again, please give it a thumbs up, comment down below, and remember to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell button to be notified of all of my uploads. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next week for another video. Stay creative.